In the dead of night, deep beneath the earth outside Moscow, a man sits before a screen. The world has just ended. He just doesn't know it yet. A single, blood-red word flashes in Cyrillic across his monitor. Launch. The system is screaming. The sirens are wailing. A satellite hanging in the blackness of space has detected the unthinkable. A nuclear missile, rising from the American heartland, screaming towards the Soviet Union. Every protocol, every drill, every nightmare scenario he has ever trained for is happening right now. He has 3 minutes. 3 minutes to validate the apocalypse. But something is wrong. Cold dread, colder than the fear of nuclear fire, creeps into his mind. The machine is certain, protocol is clear, but his gut is telling him that billions of lives are about to be extinguished because of a ghost in the machine. This is the story of the day that never happened. The day our world was nearly erased from existence, not by a hostile act, not by a madman with his finger on the button, but by a software glitch. A single, silent error, buried in lines of code, that brought humanity to the absolute brink. This isn't a fictional thriller. This is the declassified, terrifyingly true story of September 26, 1983. And the man who had to decide whether or not to start World War III, to understand how close we came. You have to understand the world of 1983. It wasn't a world of peace. It was a tinderbox, soaked in gasoline, with world leaders holding matches. The Cold War was at its absolute zenith. A deep paranoid freeze had settled over relations between the United States and the Soviet Union. Earlier that year, President Ronald Reagan had delivered his famous Evil Empire speech, framing the conflict not as a political disagreement, but as a moral crusade between good and evil. The Soviets, under the aging and deeply suspicious leadership of Yuri Andropov, a former KGB director, took this as a declaration of intent. They genuinely believed the United States was planning a decapitating nuclear first strike. Then, just 3 weeks before our story begins, on September 1st, 1983, a Soviet fighter jet shot down a civilian airliner. Korean Airlines Flight 007, after it strayed into Soviet airspace. 269 people, including a US congressman, were killed. The world was outraged. The rhetoric escalated to a fever pitch. In Washington, they saw a barbaric act of aggression. In Moscow, they saw a potential spy plane probing their defenses, a prelude to an attack. Trust was non-existent. Paranoia was the official policy on both sides. It was in this atmosphere of extreme tension, on the night of September 25th, that Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov reported for duty. His post was Serpukhov 15, a top-secret command bunker hidden in a forest south of Moscow. This was the nerve center of the Soviet Union's brand-new state-of-the-art satellite early warning system. Its job was singular: to watch America and give Moscow the precious few minutes of warning they'd need if the missiles ever started flying. Petrov wasn't even supposed to be there. He was the chief duty officer, an analyst, an engineer who was filling in for a sick colleague. He was desk-bound, more comfortable with schematics and data flows than military dogma. As he settled in for the long, quiet overnight shift, the world outside was on a knife's edge. But inside the sterile, controlled environment of the bunker, everything was normal. The consoles glowed with a calm green light. The systems were stable. The 200 military personnel in the bunker went about their routine tasks. The only sound was the quiet hum of machines, processing data from silent sentinels orbiting the globe. It was just another night in the Cold War. Tense, but stable. Routine, safe, but orbiting high above the Earth. A fatal flaw in one of those sentinels was about to collide with a freak alignment of cosmic geometry. The routine was about to be shattered forever. The system Petrov was monitoring was called Oko, the Russian word for eye. It was the pride of Soviet military technology. A network of satellites designed to do one thing with terrifying precision: detect the launch of American Minuteman nuclear missiles from their silos in the Midwest. The concept was brilliant in its simplicity. A nuclear missile launch creates an unimaginable plume of infrared energy, a massive blast of heat. The Oko satellites were equipped with highly sensitive telescopes that stared down at the Earth, looking for these sudden, brilliant blooms of heat against the cold, dark background of the planet's surface. To the programmers who designed its software, A real nuclear attack would be unmistakable. It wouldn't be one or two missiles. It would be a salvo launch. Hundreds, if not thousands of missiles, rising all at once to overwhelm Soviet defenses. The computer system was programmed with this assumption. It was looking for a specific, massive, undeniable signature. But in that logic, there was a hidden mistake, an oversight. The system's creators had designed a near-perfect eye, but they had given it a blind spot. They hadn't fully accounted for the infinite, bizarre complexities of Mother Nature. The Oko satellites flew in a unique, highly elongated orbit called a Molniya orbit. This allowed them to hang at their highest point for long periods over the northern hemisphere, giving them a continuous view of the United States. At a very specific time of year, during the autumnal equinox, at a very specific time of day, just after midnight Moscow time, a rare and perfect alignment could occur. The sun hovering just below the Earth's horizon. The Oko satellite at the apex of its orbit, in any high-altitude clouds sitting over the American missile fields, could line up in a perfect straight line. The programmers had anticipated the satellite might see the sun's reflection off oceans or low-level clouds. The software was designed to filter that out, but they hadn't properly considered the unique properties of sunlight reflecting off the tops of very high-altitude clouds. To the satellite's infrared eye, the glint of the sun off the top of a cirrus cloud at just the right angle could look eerily similar to the hot exhaust of a rocket engine. It was a 1 in a million possibility, a freak cosmic coincidence. Harmless on its own. But buried deep in the Oko system's code, this harmless reflection was about to be interpreted as the single most dangerous signal in human history. The system wasn't just going to see a reflection, it was going to see an attack. The clock ticked past midnight. It was now September 26, 1983. Inside Serpukhov 15, the atmosphere was quiet, almost sleepy. Stanislav Petrov sat at his console, monitoring the flow of data. Everything was nominal. Then, at 12:15 a.m., it happened. The serene green of the monitors vanished, replaced by a glaring, flashing red. A massive backlit panel screamed the word, "Launch." Petrov's blood ran cold. He stared at the screen. The electronic map of the United States showed a single point of origin, a missile base in Montana. The system's confidence level, highest. This was it. The moment every soldier in the Cold War dreaded, his training kicked in. His first job was to check the system, to run through a 30-point checklist to ensure this wasn't an equipment malfunction inside the bunker. His hands moved with practiced speed. Every light was green. Every diagnostic was perfect. The system was functioning exactly as designed. He grabbed the phone and made his first report to the duty officer at the Soviet Air Defense Headquarters. "I'm reporting," he said, his voice tight. "The system has given a preliminary warning of a missile strike from the United States." The room was electric with tension. 200 people, military officers and technicians, were now on their feet, their eyes locked on him, the man in the center chair. Their own protocols were kicking in. They were preparing the Soviet response. Petrov turned back to his screen, his heart pounding against his ribs. The protocol was to wait for confirmation. A single launch could be an error. The system needed to see a pattern. Then it happened again. The screen flashed. Launch. A second missile had lifted off. A wave of panic, visceral and real, washed over the room. This was no longer a preliminary warning. This was a pattern. Before he could even process it, a third siren screamed. Then a fourth, and a fifth. The map was now lit up. The system was no longer reporting a single missile. It was reporting a coordinated 5-missile strike heading directly for the Soviet Union. The panel in front of him now displayed a new, even more terrifying word: missile attack. The system had automatically upgraded the threat level. It was no longer a possibility, it was a fact. According to the billion-ruble computer, World War III had begun. Petrov's subordinates were shouting at him, "Confirm the attack. Report it up." The direct line to the high command was open. They were waiting for his word. His job, his only job in this moment, was to pass the information up the chain of command. From there, General Secretary Andropov and the defense ministers would have mere minutes to order a full-scale, planet-killing retaliatory strike. Every piece of data, every flashing light, every screaming siren, and every person in that room was telling him to confirm the launch. Petrov held 2 phones, a web of cords tangled in his trembling hands. One connected him to the technicians who built the Oko system. The other, the hotline, connected him to the men who controlled the Soviet nuclear arsenal. The sirens wailed. The screen flashed. Missile attack. Missile attack. The system was telling him, with absolute certainty, that 5 thermonuclear warheads were currently arcing through space. In about 20 minutes, they would begin re-entry. In 25 minutes, Moscow and millions of his countrymen could be vaporized. He had to make a choice. Trust the machine and give the order that would unleash hell on Earth. Or trust a tiny gnawing doubt in the pit of his stomach, a feeling that this was all horribly catastrophically wrong. He lifted the hotline to his commander. The fate of every person on the planet rested on the next words to come out of his mouth. And in that moment, with the world holding its breath, Stanislav Petrov prepared to break every rule he had ever been taught. To understand the impossible pressure on Petrov, you have to understand the insane logic he was trapped inside. It was a doctrine known by a simple, chilling acronym, MAD, Mutually Assured Destruction. MAD wasn't a policy for winning a nuclear war. It was a policy for ensuring nobody could. The idea was that if both the US and the USSR had enough nuclear weapons to completely destroy each other, no rational leader would ever start a conflict. It was a suicide pact on a global scale. But there was a flaw in the logic. What if one side believed it could launch a surprise first strike so devastating that it wiped out the other side's ability to retaliate? This was the decapitation strike that Soviet leadership feared above all else. Their solution was a policy called launch on warning. This meant they would not wait for enemy bombs to actually start detonating on their soil. The moment their early warning systems, like the Oko satellite, confirmed an incoming attack, they would launch their entire arsenal in response. They would fire their missiles while the enemies were still in the air. This is why Serpukhov 15 existed. It wasn't just an observation post. It was the trigger. A confirmed report from Petrov's bunker would give the Kremlin the justification it needed to launch everything they had. There would be no time for debate, no time for a second opinion. The decision would be made in minutes. The Oko system was the star witness. Let's go back to the technology. Imagine you're in a pitch-black football stadium, and you're looking for someone to light a single match. That's essentially what the Oko satellite's infrared telescope was doing. It was scanning the dark face of the Earth, looking for the sudden, tiny, intensely hot signature of a rocket engine igniting. The software was programmed to be smart about it. It knew what a sunrise looked like. It knew about forest fires. It was designed to filter out false positives, but its entire worldview was based on data and assumptions fed to it by its human creators, and those assumptions were incomplete. Here's the heart of the problem: the cosmic alignment. On September 26, 1983, the geometry was perfect. As the Earth rotated, the sun, still below the horizon from the satellite's perspective, cast its rays up into the highest levels of the atmosphere. Those rays hit the tops of a bank of clouds floating over North Dakota near a US missile field. The light then reflected off these clouds at a very specific, shallow angle, directly into the lens of the Oko satellite. The satellite sensor didn't see a cloud. It saw a sudden bloom of infrared energy, originating from a location known to house ICBMs. The software cross-referenced the location and the heat signature. All the boxes were ticked. It screamed, "Launch." So why 5 missiles, and not 1 or 100? This was the second part of the software's logical failure. As the satellite continued on its orbital path, it saw the reflection from a different patch of clouds a few seconds later. The software, designed to track multiple targets in a salvo, didn't interpret this as the same single reflection seen from a new angle. It interpreted it as a second missile launch, and a third, and a fourth, and a fifth. The system was, in a way, working perfectly. It was detecting what it was designed to detect. The problem wasn't a bug in the code in the traditional sense, like a typo. The problem was that the code's fundamental understanding of reality was flawed. It had been taught what a missile looked like, but no one had ever taught it what a very specific type of sun glint looked like. It was a failure of imagination, immortalized in silicon. And there was one more critical factor: Stanislav Petrov. Petrov was not a career military officer. He was a man of science and engineering, he had a PhD in the very systems he was monitoring. He didn't just know the protocol, he knew the machine, knew its strengths, and more importantly, he knew its potential weaknesses. He knew it was new. He knew it had been rushed into service. He had, in his own words, doubts about the computer, so as the sirens blared, two competing thoughts were at war in his mind. The soldier was screaming, "Follow the protocol." But the engineer was whispering, "Does this data actually make any sense?" Back in the bunker, the air is thick with sweat and fear. The giant red screen is bathing Petrov's face in a hellish glow. Missile attack. He looks at the map. 5 missiles. Just 5. This is the thought that latches in his engineer's brain, the question that cuts through the panic. Why only 5? He knew the American arsenal. He knew their strategy. A first strike, a decapitation strike, wouldn't be 5 missiles. It would be an allowed assault. Hundreds of them. Sky filled with fire, designed to saturate and overwhelm every defense. To launch just 5 missiles would be, from a military standpoint, insane. It made no sense. It would be like trying to take down a bear by throwing a handful of pebbles at it. All it would do is guarantee a massive, furious retaliation. He's on the phone with the system technicians, his voice sharp, demanding answers. What are you seeing? Check your data. They can only tell him what he already knows. The data is coming through. The system is functioning as intended. He glances at the other reports coming in. The second layer of Soviet early warning was a network of ground-based over-the-horizon radars. They were powerful, but they couldn't see past the curve of the Earth. They wouldn't be able to detect anything until the missiles were much closer, minutes from impact. Right now, the ground radar screens were empty. Every protocol told him to ignore that. The entire purpose of the multi-billion-ruble OKO system was to provide a warning before the ground radars could see anything. He was supposed to trust the satellite. He was supposed to trust the machine. His commander is on the other line, his voice a torrent of panicked questions. I'm awaiting your report. Petrov feels the weight of 200 pairs of eyes on him, faces of young soldiers, barely out of their teens, pale with terror, looking to him for guidance. He is the single point of failure or salvation for the entire planet. He has a 50-50th choice. If he's wrong and he reports it as a false alarm, first American warheads will detonate over Soviet cities in under 20 minutes. His inaction will have doomed his country. He will be remembered as the worst kind of traitor and fool. But if he's right, he confirms the launch, and the generals push the button, and it turns out to be a mistake. He will be the man who initiated the end of the world. His internal computer, his human intuition, was screaming that the data was illogical. The machine's cold, hard logic was screaming that it was 100% real. He had to choose which computer to trust. Stanislav Petrov took a breath. He looked at the screaming red screen one last time. He made his decision. He spoke into the hotline to his commander. His voice, remarkably, was steady. He did not report a missile attack. Instead, he said, I am transmitting a false alarm. Sound design. A soft, low, awe-inspired musical swell begins to build. Voiceover. Silence on the other end of the line. Then an explosion of rage and disbelief. His commander was screaming at him. How could he know? The system says it's an attack. Petrov stood his ground. He lied. He told his commander there were faults in the system, that the technicians were seeing errors. It wasn't true. The system was telling everyone it was perfect, but he needed to buy time. He then turned to his frantic subordinates in the bunker and did the same, calmly telling them there was an equipment malfunction and to await further instructions. He projected an aura of calm control, even as his insides were churning with terror. He had made the call. I had staked the life of every person on Earth on his own gut feeling. And now came the hardest part. The waiting. For the next 15 minutes, Stanislav Petrov and the 200 souls in that bunker sat in the most agonizing suspense imaginable. The sirens still blared. The screens still flashed. If he was wrong, they were all living on borrowed time. Every tick of the clock was a second closer to impact. He watched the clock counting down the minutes until the missiles were supposed to strike. He watched the empty ground radar screens. 5 minutes passed. Nothing. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. 15 minutes. The time of theoretical impact. Still nothing. No explosions. No seismic reports, no flashes of light on the horizon. Slowly, agonizingly, the tension began to drain from the room. The sirens were eventually silenced. The red screens were switched off. The crisis was over. The missiles had simply vanished because they were never there. They were just ghosts of light, phantoms in the machine. Stanislav Petrov slumped back in his chair, drenched in sweat, his legs shaking so badly he could barely stand. He had stared into the face of nuclear Armageddon, and he had blinked, and in doing so, he had saved the world. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like he was going to have a nervous breakdown. He had just gambled with the fate of humanity and won. But the system had failed in the most spectacular way imaginable. But let's step into an alternate reality for a moment. A reality that was just one decision away. What if the man in the chair that night wasn't Stanislav Petrov, the skeptical engineer? What if it was the man he was replacing, career military officer? A man trained his entire life to follow orders, to trust the system, and to obey protocol without question. Let's call him Comrade Ivanov. The sirens blare, screen flashes launch. Ivanov runs his diagnostics. The system is perfect. He sees one missile, then two, then five. The system upgrades the warning to missile attack. His subordinates are screaming at him to report. He doesn't hesitate. Doesn't have a PhD in satellite imaging. He has a duty to perform. He picks up the hotline to his commander. I am transmitting a confirmed missile attack. 5 targets, highest confidence. The attack is real. The word goes up the chain in seconds. From the Air Defense HQ to the General Staff. To the black leather briefcase the Cheget held by an aide next to General Secretary Yuri Andropov. Andropov is awakened. The news is stark. The early warning system has confirmed a U.S. first strike. The launch is real. The missiles are in the air. Remember the context? Cal 007 was 3 weeks ago. Reagan's evil empire speech. The deep, entrenched paranoia. There is no reason to doubt the report. The decision is made. There's no other choice under the launch on warning doctrine. Orders given. Across the vast expanse of the Soviet Union, silo covers weighing hundreds of tons grind open. Onboard nuclear submarines lurking deep in the Atlantic and Pacific. Captains enter their launch codes. Within 5 minutes of Ivanov's call, thousands of Soviet ICBMs are clawing their way into the sky. At NORAD, deep inside Cheyenne Mountain, the American screens light up like a Christmas tree from hell. It is the attack they have feared for 40 years. It's real. The President of the United States is rushed to Air Force One. The decision he has to make is no decision at all. The country is already gone. Retaliation is the only option. The order goes out. American Minuteman missiles, Peacekeepers, submarine-launched Tridents, and nuclear-armed B-52 bombers are unleashed. The first Soviet warheads begin to detonate 25 minutes after Ivanov's call. Washington, D.C., New York, London, Paris, Bonn, they cease to exist in a flash of white-hot light. Millions are vaporized in an instant. Minutes later, the American warheads arrive. Moscow, Leningrad, Kiev, gone. Within a single hour, the great cities of the Northern Hemisphere become radioactive funeral pyres. Over 500 million people are dead. But that's just the beginning. The real horror comes next. The nuclear winter. The immense firestorms from the burning cities throw millions of tons of black, toxic soot into the stratosphere. This dark cloud spreads, blanketing the globe, blocking out the sun. Not for days, but for years. Global temperatures plummet by 20 degrees Celsius. Crops fail worldwide. Agriculture collapses. The survivors of the initial blasts now face a new enemy: global famine and freezing darkness. Society breaks down into a desperate, brutal fight for scraps. The human race is thrown back into the Stone Age, but a Stone Age poisoned with radiation, where the sky is always dark and the earth is always cold. Civilization as we know it is over. History has ended. And this entire apocalyptic vision, this entire alternate reality of unimaginable horror was avoided. Because one man, in one moment, decided that a 5-missile attack just didn't make any sense. The world we live in today, the fact that you have a family, a job, a future, a simple, beautiful fact that you are alive to watch this video, is in many ways a direct result of Stanislav Petrov's gut feeling. In a sane world, Stanislav Petrov would have been carried out of that bunker on the shoulders of his comrades, hailed as a national hero. That is not what happened. The incident was a source of profound, humiliating embarrassment for the Soviet military. Their prized, multi-billion ruble eye in the sky. Their shield against American aggression had been completely fooled by a sunbeam. It had nearly caused the end of the world. The event was immediately classified at the highest level. Logbooks from that night were altered or destroyed. Petrov was intensely interrogated by his superiors. They didn't praise his cool-headed intuition. They grilled him. Why didn't he follow protocol? Why didn't he fill out the journals correctly during the chaos? He was officially reprimanded for improper paperwork. He was never punished, but he was certainly never rewarded. His career was effectively over. He was seen as an unreliable officer. He was sidelined to a less sensitive post, and within a year, he took early retirement. The stress of that night had shattered his nerves. He suffered a complete mental breakdown. For more than a decade, the world had no idea who he was or what he had done. He lived in a small, cramped apartment in a town outside Moscow, a forgotten man, haunted by the memory of the night he held the world in his hands. It wasn't until 1998, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that a senior Russian general revealed the story to a visiting Western journalist. Suddenly, this humble pensioner was thrust into the global spotlight. He was flown around the world, given awards, and dubbed by the media the man who saved the world. It was a title he always rejected. I was not a hero, he would say. I was just doing my job. I was the right person, at the right place, at the right time. That's all. The Soviet engineers did eventually fix the software in the Oko system. It taught the computer what sun glinting off high-altitude clouds looked like. But the real transformation wasn't in the code. It was in our understanding. The Petrov incident was a terrifying wake-up call. It was the ultimate proof that our complex automated systems of war were fragile, that the logic of mutually assured destruction was itself a form of madness, and that sometimes the fate of the world can come down to the very human, very fallible judgment of a single person. Stanislav Petrov passed away in 2017, in the same quiet obscurity in which he had lived most of his life. His story feels like a relic of a bygone era, the dusty chapter from the Cold War, but it has never been more relevant. We live in a world increasingly run by algorithms, our financial markets, our medical diagnoses, our social interactions, and now the very weapons of war are being handed over to the cold, fast, and supposedly infallible logic of artificial intelligence. We are building new versions of the ecosystem every single day. We are teaching them to see patterns, to make predictions, and to take action faster than any human ever could. We trust them because they are not emotional, they are not irrational, they just follow the code. But the Petrov incident reveals the terrifying flaw in that trust. What happens when the code is based on an incomplete picture of reality? What happens when the machine encounters a scenario its programmers never imagined? The story of Stanislav Petrov isn't just about a near miss with nuclear war. It's about the eternal, fragile, and indispensable value of human intuition. It's the story of a man who, surrounded by machines, screaming certainty, had the courage to embrace doubt. He wasn't a hero because he was right. He was a hero because he was willing to consider the possibility that he and the entire system he served might be wrong. The greatest danger we face isn't always the bomb itself. Sometimes it's the circuit designed to detect it. And as we race to build a future governed by AI, the question Petrov's story forces us to ask is this: when the next screen starts flashing red, and the algorithm tells us with 100% confidence that the unthinkable is happening, will be our Stanislav Petrov. Will there be one at all?